All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep on vitamin K. You know, the one that helps your blood clot?
Right, right.
But get this, there's way more to it. We dug into this research review, and wow, let me tell you, my shopping list is never going to be the same.
It really is fascinating. See, vitamin K, it's like this silent operator working behind the scenes, influencing all sorts of processes we don't even realize. Way beyond just blood clotting, it actually modifies at least 18 different proteins, not just the 7 involved in that.
18. Wait, so back up a sec. What's it even mean to modify a protein, and why should we care?
Well, picture this. Vitamin K is like that crucial ingredient in the final steps of making a protein. It helps them fold into the right shape, like origami, to make them work properly. And this has some pretty big implications for things like, well, bone health, for sure. But even, get this, heart health.
Okay, so you're telling me more leafy greens could actually protect my ticker, too, on top of strong bones.
That's what researchers are looking into.
Right.
It all comes down to how vitamin K regulates calcium. We need calcium for bones, right? But when it builds up in our arteries, that's when things go south. It hardens them up, increases that risk of heart disease. But vitamin K, it steps in like a traffic cop and makes sure that calcium goes where it's supposed to and stays out of trouble.
So vitamin K is like a calcium chaperone. Amazing.
I gotta admit, I always thought vitamin K was just, well, vitamin K. But getting ready for this, I learned there's actually a whole bunch of different types. Blew my mind.
You're totally right. There's K1 called phylloquinone. That's your leafy greens, spinach, kale, that good stuff. Then there's K2, menachinones. Now, those are mostly from bacteria. You find them in fermented foods, like cheese.
Hold up, so my cheese addiction is good for me now.
Maybe. But here's the thing. Each type of vitamin K, it's got its own look, its own chemical structure, and that affects how it gets absorbed, how it travels in the body, how it gets used. Okay, so different types, different personalities. Got it. But how does the body even handle all these different vitamin Ks? You mentioned something about kinetics earlier, didn't you?
Ah, yes. Kinetics. That's basically the journey of vitamin K through your system. From food to your blood to where it needs to go, how it breaks down, the whole 9 yards. And it's a different trip depending on which type of K we're talking about. Let's say you're having a spinach salad packed with K1.
Ooh, now you're making me hungry. Spinach salad with a nice light vinaigrette.
Perfect. So you're digesting that salad, and the K1, it gets absorbed in your small intestine. From there into the bloodstream, off to the liver, other tissues, wherever it's needed to activate those proteins we were talking about.
So it's like each type of vitamin K has its own little travel itinerary, different stops along the way.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, there are synthetic forms of vitamin K too. K3, K4, they've got their own unique kinetics as well. Researchers are still figuring out exactly how all these different forms move through the body and what they do once they get there.
Sounds like a real scientific puzzle. But before we get too deep into the technical stuff, I gotta ask, is there any risk of, getting too much vitamin K? Can you OD on leafy greens and cheese? Asking for a friend?
That's a great question. For the most part, vitamin K from natural sources like food is pretty safe, even in larger amounts. Now, the synthetic stuff, especially K3, if you take huge doses of that, there could be some side effects. So always best to be mindful,
Like with most things, moderation. Always check with your doc before you go crazy on supplements, right?
Exactly. Now that we've laid the groundwork, explored all these different vitamin Ks and their journeys, let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
What does all this mean for you, for your health?
So we've got all these different vitamin Ks, different personalities, different journeys through the body. But how do we actually see this information? Like, what does it all mean for our health, for the choices we make?
Well, you see, the exciting thing is research is starting to uncover some pretty specific benefits linked to different forms of vitamin K. For example, there's some evidence suggesting that certain types of K2 might be especially important for bone health, maybe even more so than K1.
Wait, hold on. More important for bones than K1. But I thought leafy greens were the bone-building superstar.
Oh, they definitely are important, don't get me wrong. But you got to remember, vitamin K2, especially some of those menachinones, they're hanging out in fermented foods, cheese, natto, And some researchers, they're starting to think that these K2 guys might be even better at getting that calcium into our bones and keeping it out of our arteries.
So you're telling me my cheese habit could actually be building stronger bones on top of, being delicious?
It's a possibility. Of course, we always need more research, but it's definitely a fascinating area to explore.
It really makes you look at those food labels differently, doesn't it? It's not just about vitamin K anymore. It's about knowing the different types, making sure we're getting a good mix from different sources.
Exactly. And that's a great point to bring up for our listeners. Take a look at what you're eating. Are you getting enough K1 from those leafy greens? And D, are you getting some of that K2 from fermented foods?
This is where I have to admit, I'm pretty good on the spinach and kale front, but fermented foods. Besides the occasional yogurt, I haven't really ventured out much.
Oh, you're missing out. There's a whole world of delicious fermented foods to discover. Besides cheese, there's natto, which is a traditional Japanese fermented soybean product, sauerkraut, kimchi, even some fermented dairy products like kefir. They've all got unique flavors, textures, and of course those beneficial K2 menachinones.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. This is why I love these deep dives. They always spark my culinary curiosity. But beyond bones, we also touched on vitamin K's potential role in heart health. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Remember how we talked about vitamin K being like a calcium traffic cop? Well, when calcium builds up in our arteries, it causes them to harden, and that's called arterial calcification. And that hardening, it can restrict blood flow, increase the risk of things like heart attacks and strokes.
So vitamin K could be helping to keep our arteries flexible, healthy.
That's what researchers are looking into. And the connection between vitamin K and heart health, it gets even more interesting when you consider the different types of K2. Some studies suggest those longer chain menachinones, the ones you find in certain fermented cheeses, they might be especially beneficial for cardiovascular health.
So longer chain K2 from cheese, the heart healthy hero. I'm going to need some cheese recommendations.
Well, some cheeses that are particularly high in those longer chain menachinones, you've got aged Gouda, Jarlsberg, Edam.
Adding those to the shopping list. This is fascinating stuff. It really shows how much more there is to learn about even the most familiar nutrients. We tend to think of vitamins as these single things, but in reality, they can be quite complex with different forms, different functions.
Exactly. And that complexity just underscores how important it is to stay informed, to keep learning about nutrition. What we know today might be just the tip of the iceberg.
Speaking of uncovering more, you mentioned earlier that research is even exploring links between vitamin K and brain health. This is blowing my mind. Tell me more about that.
It's still early days, but some studies are suggesting that vitamin K, especially K2, might play a role in cognitive function, maybe even offer some protection against age-related decline.
So could getting enough vitamin K actually help keep our brains sharp as we age? That's incredible.
That's what researchers are hoping to find out. They're looking at how vitamin K might influence different processes in the brain. Things like protecting brain cells from damage, supporting communication between neurons.
Wow, so vitamin K, from blood clotting to brain power, this is revolutionary.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of our bodies, doesn't it? And the power of nutrients to impact our health in so many ways.
This is why I find this stuff so fascinating. It's a reminder that there's always something new to discover, even about things we think we already know.
And that's what makes nutrition science so exciting. It's a constantly evolving field, always new discoveries on the horizon.
Well, before we get too carried away with the excitement of future research, I want to bring things back down to earth for a moment. Remember how we talked about the challenges scientists face in accurately measuring different forms of vitamin K?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's important for our listeners to understand why this is such a hurdle and what it means for how we interpret the research on vitamin K.
You're right, it's crucial. Because we're still refining our ability to measure those different forms. It means a lot of the research we've talked about today, while promising, needs to be taken with a grain of salt.
So even though we're seeing those exciting associations between vitamin K intake and all these health benefits, it's possible the picture's even more complex than we currently understand.
Exactly. It's like we're looking at a puzzle, but some of the pieces are still missing. Until we can accurately and consistently measure those different vitamin K forms in different tissues, in different people, it's going to be tough to really grasp all the nuances of how this nutrient works.
That makes sense. So what does this mean for us practically? Should we just throw in the towel and say, well, we don't know enough, so why bother?
No, not at all. I think it's about finding that balance between acknowledging the limitations of the research and embracing what we do know. We know vitamin K is vital for blood clotting, and there's growing evidence for its role in bone health, heart health, and maybe even cognitive function and cancer prevention.
So while we wait for the science to catch up, we can still make smart choices based on what we do know.
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful things we can do is focus on our diet. By making sure we're eating a balanced, diverse diet, plenty of leafy greens, fermented foods, we're increasing our chances of getting a good mix of those different vitamin K forms.
It's like diversifying our vitamin K portfolio, right?
Okay.
Making sure we've got all our bases covered no matter which form turns out to be the star player.
I like that. And remember, food is always the best foundation. Supplements can be helpful in some cases, but nothing beats the symphony of nutrients you get from real whole foods.
Like enjoying the whole orchestra instead of just a single instrument, right? Food just offers that richness, that complexity.
Precisely. You know, there's one more thing I think is really important for our listeners to understand about vitamin K.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Often when we talk about vitamin K, we get fixated on those specific roles, blood clotting, bones, heart. But vitamin K, it's involved in so much more than that.
Okay, you've got my attention. What else is this multi-talented vitamin up to?
Well, there's growing evidence suggesting it might be involved in regulating how cells grow and develop, how our bodies handle inflammation, even supporting our immune system.
Wow, so it's like this behind-the-scenes conductor orchestrating all these different aspects of our health.
Exactly. And that's a crucial takeaway. Vitamin K, it's not just a one-trick pony. It's this complex, multifaceted nutrient that's fundamental for overall health and vitality.
I love that perspective. It shifts the focus from just preventing deficiencies to truly appreciating the broader role this vitamin plays in our well-being.
And it reminds us there's always more to learn, even about things we think we know.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the missing puzzle piece. Remember earlier when we talked about how challenging it is for scientists to accurately measure those different forms of vitamin K?
Yes, the vitamin K measurement conundrum.
Exactly. Now, I know this might get a bit technical, but I think it's important for our listeners to grasp why this is such a challenge and what it means for our understanding of this nutrient.
Absolutely. As we mentioned before, those different forms of vitamin K, they exist in minuscule amounts in our bodies. And to make things even trickier, they've got these very similar chemical structures, making it incredibly difficult to tell them apart using those standard lab tests.
So it's like searching for a needle in a haystack, but the needle is disguised as hay.
Perfect analogy. It's incredibly tough. But thankfully, scientists are brilliant folks. They're always coming up with new, more sophisticated methods to improve the accuracy of vitamin K detection.
Okay, so tell us about these cutting-edge techniques. How are they tackling this measurement challenge?
Well, one of the most promising techniques is called high-performance liquid chromatography, or HPLC for short. It's basically a super fast, incredibly precise separation system. It can isolate those different forms of vitamin K based on their unique chemical properties.
So it's like a high-tech vitamin K sorting machine.
Exactly. And often they combine HPLC with another powerful technique called mass spectrometry, that one can actually identify and quantify those different vitamin K molecules with amazing accuracy.
Wow, so they're bringing out the big guns for this. But with all this advanced technology, are scientists finally starting to crack the code of vitamin K measurement?
They're definitely making progress. And the insights they're gaining from these methods are helping us understand the complex journey of vitamin K through the body in much greater detail.
That's encouraging. So even though we don't have a simple blood test to tell us exactly how much of each type of vitamin K we have right now, the research is moving forward, and that's something to be optimistic about.
Absolutely. In the meantime, we can still be proactive about our vitamin K intake, focusing on that balanced diet, getting those leafy greens, fermented foods, and staying informed about the latest scientific discoveries.
Sounds like a plan. Well, speaking of staying informed, I think we have one final and perhaps the most intriguing area of vitamin K research to explore before we wrap up this deep dive.
You're talking about the emerging research on vitamin K and cancer.
You read my mind. Now, I want to be very clear here. We're not saying that vitamin K is a cure for cancer or that it can replace conventional treatments. This is still very much an evolving area of research.
Absolutely. It's critical for our listeners to understand that the research is in its early stages, and any potential benefits of vitamin K in relation to cancer, well, we've got a lot more to learn.
Exactly. But even though it's early days, there are some interesting findings emerging that hint at a possible role for vitamin K in cancer prevention, even treatment.
That's right. A number of observational studies have found a link between higher intakes of vitamin K, particularly K2, and a lower risk of certain types of cancer. Liver cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, to name a few.
So there seems to be a correlation between more vitamin K and a lower risk of some cancers. But what's the science behind this potential link?
Well, researchers are exploring a few different mechanisms. One theory is that vitamin K's ability to regulate cell growth and development could play a role in preventing that uncontrolled growth of cancer cells.
So it's like vitamin K is helping to keep those cells in line.
Exactly. Another area of research is looking at vitamin K's potential to trigger something called apoptosis, which is essentially programmed cell death. In cancer, this process often goes haywire, allowing cancer cells to survive and multiply. But researchers think vitamin K might be able to help restore that natural cell death process, getting rid of those rogue cancer cells.
Wow, so it's not just about preventing cancer cells from growing in the first place, it's also about potentially helping the body eliminate those cells that become cancerous.
That's the idea. And while the research is still preliminary, there have been some promising results from studies using vitamin K analogs. Those are synthetic compounds that mimic the effects of vitamin K as potential cancer therapies.
Okay, so some encouraging signs in the lab. But what about human studies? Are there any trials going on right now to investigate vitamin K's potential in cancer treatment?
Yes, there are a number of clinical trials currently looking at vitamin K, mainly K2, in various types of cancer. They're investigating whether vitamin K can enhance existing treatments, maybe even help prevent cancer from coming back.
So it's too soon to say for sure, but the research is definitely promising and it's something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And it's important for our listeners to remember, while we're excited about the potential of vitamin K in cancer prevention and treatment, we need to approach this topic with caution and rely on evidence-based information.
Well said. And I think that's a great point to emphasize as we wrap up this deep dive. We've covered so much today. Different types of vitamin K, their journeys through the body, research exploring benefits for bone health, heart health, cognitive function, even cancer prevention. It's been a whirlwind.
It has. And I hope our listeners have gained a newfound appreciation for this incredible nutrient and how it impacts our health and well-being.
Me too. I know I have. I'm definitely going to be making some changes to my diet to make sure I'm getting a good mix of those vitamin K superstars.
That's fantastic. And I encourage our listeners to do the same. Explore those leafy greens, embrace those fermented delights, and keep those minds hungry for knowledge.
It really is incredible to think about all the potential benefits of vitamin K we're still uncovering. But before we get too carried away, dreaming about a future where vitamin K solves all our health problems, I kind of want to bring us back down to earth for a sec.
Back to reality, huh?
Well, sort of. Remember earlier when we were talking about how tough it is to accurately measure those different forms of vitamin K? I think it's worth circling back to that because, well, it has some pretty big implications for how we understand this whole nutrient thing.
You're absolutely right. The fact that, we're still working on how to measure those different vitamin K forms, it means that a lot of the research we've been discussing, as exciting as it is, needs to be interpreted, well, carefully.
So even though we're seeing these connections between vitamin K and all these amazing health outcomes, there's a chance the whole picture is even more complicated than we realize.
Exactly. It's like, imagine we're looking at this beautiful tapestry, right?
Right.
But some of the threads are still missing. Until we can measure those different vitamin K forms accurately, consistently in different tissues and different people, it's going to be tough to fully grasp all the little details, how it all works.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for us, practically speaking? Should we just throw our hands up and say, forget it, we don't know enough about vitamin K, why even bother?
No, not at all. I think it's about finding that sweet spot, acknowledging what we don't know yet, but also using the knowledge we do have. We know for sure that vitamin K is crucial for blood clotting, and there's more and more evidence pointing to its role in bone health, heart health, maybe even brain health, and cancer prevention.
So while we wait for science to catch up, we can still make smart choices based on what we do know.
Absolutely. And one of the best things we can do is focus on, you guessed it, our diet. Making sure we're eating a balanced, colorful diet, loads of leafy greens, those fermented foods. It all helps increase our chances of getting a good mix of all those different vitamin K forms.
It's like, diversifying our vitamin K portfolio, right?
Yeah.
Making sure we're covered no matter what.
Love that analogy. And don't forget, food is always the best foundation. Supplements can be helpful sometimes, but they'll never replace the magic of real whole foods.
Right. It's like experiencing the whole orchestra versus just listening to one instrument, isn't it? Food just offers that depth, that richness.
Exactly. Before we wrap up, there's one last thing I'd like to emphasize about vitamin K.
Okay, I'm listening.
We tend to get caught up in those specific roles, blood clotting, bones, heart. But vitamin K, it does so much more than that. There's increasing evidence suggesting it plays a part in how our cells grow and develop, how our bodies deal with inflammation, even how strong our immune system is.
Wow, so it's like this hidden conductor making sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes.
Precisely. And that's the key takeaway here.
Hmm.
Vitamin K, it's not just a one-hit wonder. It's this complex, multifaceted nutrient that's absolutely essential for our overall health and vitality.
I love that perspective. It's not just about preventing deficiencies. It's about appreciating the bigger picture, how this amazing vitamin contributes to our well-being.
Exactly. And it reminds us that there's always something new to learn, even about things we think we know.
Well said. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes mysterious world of vitamin K.
It's been a journey.
It has. And I hope our listeners are leaving with a newfound appreciation for this incredible nutrient and all the amazing things it does for our bodies.
Me too. It's truly fascinating.
I know I've learned so much, and I'm definitely going to be making some changes to my diet to make sure I'm getting enough of those vitamin K all-stars.
That's great to hear. And to our listeners, I encourage you to do the same. Embrace those leafy greens, experiment with fermented foods, and most importantly, never stop learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this vitamin K adventure, everyone. Until next time, stay curious and keep those minds and bodies nourished.